Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. Tonight, we are continuing our series on going through my book, my most recent book, chapter by chapter. Like I said at the outset before we began recording, if you have any questions, please submit those at any time, any moment. Any questions about this topic, but also about this chapter if you happen to have read it. It'll help me to understand what I might not have explained clearly, or again, you lose your perspective when you're writing and when you're teaching the same thing over and over again. So please feel free to submit questions at any time. Malia, who is moderating for me this evening, will pass those questions along to me when it's the right time in the broadcast or when there's an open moment. I'm going to go through the chapter and share with you ideas and concepts and quotes as we go and try to lay out what I thought to be a foundational chapter for their book. I've told this story before, but I'm going to tell it again because it comes from this chapter and this context in this book. I realized that I spend so much time talking with parents, and I talk about flexibility. I talk about listening. I talk about trauma responses that parents have. Ultimately, I'm talking about the ability to contain, which is a therapeutic term that means to be able to listen and respond patiently and lovingly and with forethought, and to be able to decide consciously how to respond to other people. It's just a non-reactive way of responding to somebody's sharing, somebody's self, somebody's the way that they're behaving. So that's containing. So I spend so much time teaching and talking about that sometimes I want to say, at first I wanted to say sometimes I forget to say, but I think sometimes I forget to think about the necessary foundation of being who you are. You know, really resting all of your work on a foundation of who you are. The shift that happens in this work, specifically with this chapter, the title of the chapter is Finding You, is that instead of judging yourself as good or bad, not enough, too much, you start to think of yourself as human, who you are. And while that might not be inspiring to some people, in fact, some people might hear that idea about self-acceptance, about seeing yourself without judgment. Some might see that as an abdication of responsibility or accountability. But really, we start to understand that it becomes the foundation for all other healthy behaviors. It becomes the foundation for compassion. It becomes the foundation or the starting point for love. And again, it's necessary. When I think about intimacy, and so many people are concerned about connection, and in fact, I think a fundamental misunderstanding of human development for the average person, for the lay person, and for many therapists for that matter, is that sense of self, identity, is a prerequisite for connection. You can only be connected or intimate with somebody to the extent that the self, who you are, is defined. Otherwise, like many of us do in this culture, we seek for relief from loneliness or pain or sadness or hurt. We seek for it in partnership, right? We seek for it in intimacy, in intimate relationships, maybe even in some cases with our children, with others, right? We seek for that comfort from other people. But if we haven't done the work to kind of discover, explore our own woundedness, really explore the terrain of what's inside of here, what's inside of your head, what's going on inside of here. If we haven't done the work to explore that, to become familiar with that terrain, then our connections are fragile. Our connections are likely to be built on a foundation of self-sacrifice, which in this context is unhealthy, right? Sacrificing, giving up your own values, your own truth, your own feelings to find belonging and acceptance. I think perhaps one of the most common errors that I see humans make, maybe universally. I'm open to the fact that there might be exceptions to this, but one of the most common mistakes that people make is that they seek a partner to escape the pain and the angst, the existential crisis. And then eventually that partnership, if that foundation isn't built, and it can be built later in our progression, but if that foundation isn't built and solidified, then we're eventually going to become unhappy with our partner because their ability to provide for us this sense of self is going to be not enough for us. So the first thing that we have to do is figure out who we are. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect or fill in the drawing with every single small brushstroke and line and shading, but we have to have some sense about who we are and the project of becoming a self. And when we make the project about becoming who we are, then when we've come up short or disappoint somebody or hurt somebody, we're clear to see that's not about something missing in us, but rather just a fact about the nature of human relationships. So we build ourselves. I tell a story in another part of the book about when my wife walks into this office where I'm sitting right now, my home office, and she starts to share a request from me, and I respond to her, unable to at that time, at that moment, be there for her. And the story is more nuanced and complex than this, but I took the risk of telling the truth about what I was able to do. And what she did was she was able to see me as not a bad husband or an uncaring husband or a failure of a husband or a husband who has his priorities about work and home mixed up, all of those criticisms that we come up with when somebody lets us down. She saw me as a human husband. I told the truth about what I could and couldn't do, and she saw me as a human husband. And then she went about taking care of her own needs that one Saturday afternoon that I'm speaking about. So that's an example when we shift from the idea about being great, being perfect, being wonderful, being good, right? That being good and right are, in a way, the opposite projects of finding you. Finding you means all of the edges of who you are, which includes the rough edges, the scarred edges, the edges that aren't completely healed or filled in. Finding you or finding your truth, which you'll hear me use that phrase, it's really just therapy jargon for understanding what you think and feel. And I love this quote from Ram Dass that I use in this chapter. And this I think could be put at the end of this chapter, but I decided to put it at the beginning. Ram Dass said, "I can do nothing for you but work on myself, and you can do nothing for me but work on yourself." When it comes down to it, that's my gift to you. I was talking to some parents just the other day who were really at odds with each other about whether or not their child was a candidate for an appropriate candidate for our program. And they were married and said that they didn't have really any fractures in their relationship, but at one point I was questioning the different pages, the different perspectives that they had. And they kind of chuckled and they said, it almost sounds like we're not married or we have a really high conflict marriage, doesn't it? And I said, no, you seem affectionate. I'm just trying to get a lay of the land about what's out there, how differently you guys feel. And I said, besides, I said, in a moment of light humor, I said, I grew up with two parents who couldn't be with each other in the same room. That's part of my story, part of my trauma history. And I said, so lucky for you, I'm accustomed to being with people who don't agree. My trauma becomes my gift to give to you. So our self, who we are, doesn't have to be this perfect, polished, complete self. I talk about at the end of this book about the idea of learning to face and understand your darkness and remain on speaking terms with your particular mental illness, your particular mental health issues. And what I'm saying is that you don't have to be perfect, but you just kind of have to have a sense of who you are, which includes the good and the bad, the ugly. One other point that I want to make before I launch into some of the other quotes and ideas in this chapter is the idea that I get this question all the time. The question I get all the time is, There's this idea, I think, in popular culture that we should feel good about ourselves intrinsically, right? That's the ideal, and that we shouldn't need. Notice the word shouldn't. That we shouldn't need others to like us or approve of us. And if we're constantly seeking after approval from others, then we're on this, excuse me, this fool's errand, right? We'll never be satisfied. And what I talk about and teach people is, and I write about it a little bit later, is the trick is not to find somebody who admires all of your wonderful qualities. That's nice. That can be validating and can feel warm and good. But the trick is to find people who can understand and accept all of you, who can see your warts and your dents and your bruises through a lens of compassion. And when somebody is allowed to see all of you, the real self or the authentic self, out of that experience comes a sense of who you are. Then I can be me. Then I can be who I am. And then the wonderful thing is, if I've come to some level of acceptance with who I am, I don't need you to take care of me anymore. I have found a sense of self through an empathic other. Really through what you might say is an attachment experience, or maybe I'll just coin the phrase, I don't know that it's a phrase I've heard before, but a reattachment experience. That's the idea. I was talking to a client just hours ago about this idea of finding acceptance in other people. And I was saying, it's not being a fast runner or beautiful or smart or amazing and getting attention for that heals you. It's being able to show up as a mess and having that be okay. So the ingredient for our healing is that we have to have experience with an empathic, compassionate, capable other person. Ideally, that would have happened in our childhood. Ideally, our parents would have been able to manage, deal with enough of their anxiety, enough of their fear to be able to see us, to be able to understand us, that even in our absolute idiocy, they would have been able to understand us. And it's in that context that we heal. In that context that we accept who we are. I've said to you many times that my very favorite book about child development, and I think it's arguably one of the most well-liked, well-known, well-read books about child development, is The Drama of the Gifted Child. But the thing I want to share with you tonight, and I've shared this before, the subtitle is The Search for the Real Self. Right? We're searching for the authentic, real self, who you are. Not the right person, not the good person. But it's so hard to think in those terms because we were taught from childhood that to be good and to be right are the things, right? But if those become the goal, they only ensure our failure, because we'll never always be good and always be right. And we've been taught to fear honesty and authenticity about who we are. And we were taught to fear it by our parents and our caregivers. In my first book, I talk about the story to highlight kind of a micro example of this. I was just finishing up the last edits, maybe the last read through of my first book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent. And we were in Los Angeles at the Marriott in Marina del Rey, if you know that Marriott. And the deal is my wife and my youngest child were with me, and I would work all day, 8 hours a day, and then at night we would go out to dinner and do some fun things together as a family. And one morning I was cuddling a little bit late in the morning with my daughter. At the time, this was probably, I don't know, 7 years ago, so she was probably 5 years old at the time. And as we were snuggling and cuddling in bed, she has 3 older siblings, that take up a lot of space right? She's the youngest. And she said to me, I wish that all of my siblings were dead. Luckily, I'd been writing my book, so I was ready for such an exchange. And I didn't follow my instinct, which was to say, well, you shouldn't think that, or let's talk about all the great things, kind of that toxic positivity. And so I leaned into it. And I said to her, her name is Liv. Her full name is Olivia, and she goes by the name Liv. And I said to Liv, I said, wouldn't it be great if it could just be us? If you didn't have to share any time with your siblings, and we could go on trips like this all the time, where it could just be me, you, and mom? And she relaxed and sighed a relaxing out breath. And then she said to me, but I really would miss them, I guess. And I said, yeah, they're pretty cool to have around also, aren't they? So instead of reacting with fear that what she shared was wrong, do you hear it? I looked at it. I was writing. It's not always like this, but I was writing and I was really conscious and I leaned into it and validated that idea, that fantasy. And then what did she do? She immediately went to the grateful place in her heart for her siblings. We're afraid of the truth. I see students in the group do this all the time. I see students in treatment do this all the time. Right? They're looking to tell the therapist the right answer. I had a client tell me recently, he said, I lied to you about 20 times in our last session. And I kind of chuckled with him and I said, that's pretty normal. He said to me, I'm always trying to impress you. And I said, that'll happen again, now and again. I tell the story in the book about my good friend who decided to quit therapy because he thought he was wasting his money because he was lying to the therapist all the time. And I said to him, everybody lies to their therapist, right? It's risky to show up and be who you are. Because the risk is that your therapist is going to replicate the wounds of your childhood and tell you the right way to be. So we're making a shift and we're leaning into the idea about who you are. And we're trying to understand first ourselves, so then we have a template for understanding other people. For those of you that are listening, not watching, you'll see you should know that I'm pointing to my head, right? Both sides of my temple. When we understand what's going on in here, when we come to get clear about how we are made, brick by brick, how the personality is made from the bottom up, brick by brick, then we have understanding about everybody else. Then we can understand our children, our spouses, our quote unquote enemies, those who seem to reflect so differently than we do. I get interested always at people's incredulousness. People sometimes, parents are so incredulous about their children. I hear people in our political climate being incredulous about the other side of the equation. And I think this incredulousness is intellectual dishonesty. It doesn't take much work to peel back a couple of layers and see yourself in the other person. But it does take work to peel back those layers. So as you do your work, mom and dad, husband and wife, brother and sister, friend and friend, as you do your work, what comes with that work is understanding toward everybody else. So this is the starting point. And I don't want to get too mystical because that's not my style and I'll probably lose some of you, but you are the universe. You are the blueprint. You're not like everybody else, at least at one level. You're very different. You have different behaviors, different personality traits and strengths and weaknesses, and the whole mix of it together is very, very unique. But at one level, at one layer, at a deeper layer, we're all the same and we're all connected. We're all the same kind of animal, if you will. So that's what this work is. Finding yourself, understanding why you struggle, understanding why you other people, othering, right? Racism and homophobia and any other ism, right? Understanding why you do that to other people and that comes from a place of fear. And then it's easy to understand everybody else. By the way, it doesn't mean you have to hang out with everybody all the time. Doesn't mean you have to hang out with racists because you understand racism. That's another mistake that happens. But you can have compassion. And it might be from farther than 6 feet away. So the foundation of all else that we're going to talk about in this book is finding you. Alice Miller said in the opening page of The Drama of the Gifted Child that we have only one enduring weapon in our fight, in our battle against mental illness, and that is the discovery of the unique emotional history of our childhood. Find out what made you you, and you will understand everybody else much better. When I talk about self, I'm talking about one's authentic truths, what one feels, thinks, likes, prefers, hates, loves, wants, needs, or values. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. I've shared with you or alluded to it. I've written about it in each book a little bit about a point in my life where I decided that my challenge in life was to tell the truth. And people say to me, what truth were you hiding? And my answer is everything. How I feel, what I like, how I felt, what I liked. If I wanted to go out tonight or stay in. If I could listen to my wife or if I was feeling depleted. I tell this story, my favorite story, which reminds me that I forget the self sometimes. I told the story about when I was deciding whether or not I wanted to invite my ex-wife over for the holidays. She was going through a personal time in her life that was challenging. My older children that we shared together were a little bit worried about her. And I was debating in my head whether I should invite her over for the holidays. Because I have this value, right, as a father that the best father that I can be is one who is there for his children. So I have this dilemma where I want to be there for them, but my ex-wife and I, we get along okay, but it's not completely comfortable. And the holidays, I finally have gotten to the point in my life around the age of 50 where I realize I can choose to spend the holidays with people that I'm happy around and that are happy around me. And that I've let go of some of the obligations, right? This is a point that I'd gotten to I'd arrived at in my life. So I'm thinking about this dilemma. I walk into my therapist's office and I describe the dilemma to her, and I can't formulate a question without the word should. So I knew I had a problem. I couldn't think of it without thinking of it as a should. So I fumbled through some sort of question like, isn't it ideal for me to be there for my children? Isn't that what one ought to strive for, right? I'm really using should, but I'm trying not to. And she said, I think you should just be you. I think that's the goal. And I remember thinking, I forgot that was the goal. I forgot that I could just be me. So I chose not to invite her over for the holidays. And by the way, soon after that, I don't know if it was the next holiday or the next year, we invited her over and we had a wonderful time. In fact, we have the holidays with her each time since then. And it's a joyous time for us and I can relax. But I was in a dilemma back then about the should. I was stuck in shoulds. There's a part in this chapter where I talk about this idea that Nietzsche has this metaphorical idea of a journey that we go through in life. We start off as a baby and then we turn into a lion. And then we face a dragon. It's very metaphorical. And what Nietzsche suggests is that when we kill the lion of should and should not, I think he calls it the dragon of should. When we kill the dragon of should and should not, we become a baby again. We become, in essence, who we are. And I know it's terrifying. I know that we have been taught, all of us, that if we discard and give up our shoulds and our shoulds, we will wreak havoc. Psychological and relational anarchy will prevail in the world. We'll be hedonistic and do whatever our carnal desires suggest to us. I don't find that to be the case. I find that that's the starting point for love. Because if we are just okay with who we are, then our interactions with other people aren't created, aren't enacted to make us feel good. We actually, I think, when we drop the shoulds and the shouldnts, it becomes the starting place for our ability to love other people. I wrote this: the unlived life of a parent is too much of a burden for any child to bear for any child. If we do not make our lives the first project, we will suffer because of it. Our partners, children, and others in our lives will suffer as well. We have to face the dragon of should and shouldn't. We have to face the dragon of selfish, right? And slay it. We have to realize that it's okay to let other people down. We have to realize it's okay to hurt other people, to disappoint other people in the service of being who we are. And it's only when we give ourselves permission to do those things can we truly and deeply love somebody. Because as I will talk about later in the book, love is a giving thing. And if we haven't sorted out our goodness, our rightness, our enoughness, we're going to try to get other people to give us that message. We'll act in such a way to support our fragile egos. So our work is to take care of ourselves first, to be who we are, to set boundaries. I've talked about this before, that a blog I wrote some time ago that said why you should be your child's friend. And the reason I say that is because of that old adage of, you're not your child's friend, you're their parent, I think is based on a misunderstanding of what it means to be a friend. Because a friend has boundaries, right? A healthy friend. A healthy friend has boundaries. They have limits. They don't compromise their values to be included, to be accepted. And so much of our paralyzation, so much of our stuckness with our children, this is the craziest idea. But with a little exploration, I think you can discover it in your own life. So much of our interactions with our children is to get them to approve of us, our goodness, to try to get from them something we should have gotten from our parents. Or if we didn't get from our parents, we get from a therapist or a sponsor or a support group. The solution to you feeling good about you is not somebody telling you that you're great. The solution is knowing that you're a horrible, messy, beautiful, wreck, profound, great person. All those things together, and it's okay. I remember I was talking to a mother many, many years ago, and she was considering sending her daughter to our program. And in her consideration, she shared with me that she had been through a horrible divorce with her ex-husband. One of those really high conflict marriages that led to a really high conflict divorce with lots of money involved. And so many, many lawyers making lots of money fighting back and forth. And as she was kind of contemplating the journey that led her to this point where we were discussing her daughter, she said, I talked to my therapist about this, and I said, look, it's my fault. My daughter's cutting and depressed or whatever the symptoms were. And she said, and so I beat myself up because, it came from our divorce. And I could have done it better. But I was so compromised that I was just as much a part of the problem as my ex-husband. So she said, so I brought this idea to my therapist. And she says, and my therapist reassured me and said, no, you were a good enough mother. And I thought about that. And this is something I've thought about for years. And so I listened to her share with me the reassurance that her therapist had given her. And so I said to her, I said, well, there's another way to think about it. Maybe it was you and your ex-husband's fault. Maybe you did act in such a way to really traumatize your daughter, and this is the way that she's coping with it. And so what then? What shall we do? Shall we demand that you give up custody of your adolescent daughter? Shall we put you in prison for being wounded and compromised? I mean, how shall we punish you? And she looked at me very shocked that I wasn't falling in line with her therapist telling her that she was a good enough parent. And I said, I don't think that will solve the problem for you. The fact of the matter is, you dented her. You know, we do that to our children. We come up short. We come up short in marriage and in friendships. We come up short as therapists. And learning to kind of lovingly understand and accept that reality is the path to self-worth and self-esteem. Self-esteem is not convincing yourself you're great. Self-esteem is realizing that you're sometimes a piece of turd, but you're still okay. And imagine that. Just imagine that for a moment, all of you. Imagine if you knew you were okay. You really knew that you were okay. Not perfect, not always amazing and wonderful, but okay. How would you act in the world? Think about that. We act out. We are compromised. We fall terribly short in our parenting ideals because we don't know that we're okay. I tell the same thing to your children when I see them. I tell them, I say, you're all okay. Yes, you've screwed up and done some stupid things. I've done as many or probably more than all of you, just by sheer volume. But you're okay. You just got some stuff that's a little bit broken and mixed up, and it's okay. We all have that. And think about that energy with mom and dad. Instead of thinking about it like, why are we doing parent work? Because our child is the one with the problem, and I never got into that kind of problem, and I go and do my work, and I'm a good dad, and I'm a good mom. You know, the most terrifying thing that I hear from a parent sometimes is the phrase, I was a good mother, I was a good father. It scares me to death. And I think when I hear that, this is going to be a lot of work. But when I hear a parent say, you know what? I have screwed up a lot. Not in a dramatically self-deprecating, guilt-dripping way, but just, I realize I make a lot of mistakes. Think of that gift to a child. Then your child gets to be mad and sad and frustrated and disappointed and hurt. I mean, think about that. If you know that you're an idiot, or human, if you want that word instead, because that's what I mean by that. If you know that you're human, then your child gets to feel what they feel and think what they think and be who they are. And they don't have to be a certain way or feel a certain way for you to be okay. That's the magic of this work. That's what we're shooting for. I wrote this, when we grow up in a home where the project is to be good and right, we are prone to lose a sense of ourselves. Being right and being a self are two diametrically opposing projects. And furthermore, as in the role of a parent, the role of a parent is to raise a healthy self, to raise healthy selves, not good children. Raising a child to be a self is the most critical thing we do to foster resiliency and provide them with the possibility they may find a connection to others. You learn to apologize, not from a place of guilt and shame, but from a place of peace and comfort and confidence. When your children tell you that you're a horrible mother and father, you learn to say, thank you for telling me, tell me more. And on the days that you can't say that, right, going back to the whole idea of this chapter, the self is first, on the days that you can't say that, you say, I can't do this today. It's too much for me. I'm limited. I wish I had more patience. I wish I had more generosity to give, but I can't today. So I'm going to retreat. I'm going to go to my practice, to my self care, whatever that looks like for you, the place where you get fed, the place where you get to relax your nervous system. I'm going to go there. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to be present for you because I've taken care of me first. It is critical, and I don't think there's a good argument against this, folks, this idea that unless you take care of yourself, you can't be there for other people. You will inevitably ask them to take care of you. You will inevitably need them to not be angry at you, need to understand your good intentions and how much you tried and how much you love them, and just create the list of thoughts, feelings, and attributes that prove that you are a good person. Perhaps the greatest gift of this work, of the work of self, is that your children don't have to carry you anymore. They don't have to carry around the defense that they need to believe and think and feel that you're a good parent. What a gift. What a gift that comes from strength and confidence and a healed and whole self. When you accept yourself, your interactions with others won't be in the service of proving your goodness and worthiness. Instead, you use your energy for loving them. To the extent that we are wounded, that we are searching for validation, it's really hard to be present, authentic, and there for somebody else. We don't tolerate their upset and angry feelings. And what do? We gaslight them. People don't like me using that word sometimes because they like to reserve it for very dramatically, malignantly narcissistic people, but it happens all the time. I see it in treatment sometimes where kids, sometimes kids are just learning to say the right thing so as not to upset all the adults so they can get home sooner. And the smart and intuitive and empathic ones, they figure out pretty quickly, I either have to carry my parents' defenses and, by the way, the therapist's defenses. I either have to carry it so I can get out of here. I'm going to be here for a long time. It's why I think that the impact letter to a parent, wherever you are, and there are thousands of people that listen to this that aren't Evoke parents and families. Wherever you are, if you have a loved one who's struggling with addiction or mental health issues, and you get them to the best treatment program in the world, you better believe that at some point there's going to be a family weekend, a partner's weekend, a parent weekend, some weekend where you are invited to sit. And ideally, essentially, the identified patient is going to share their grievances. Any good, decent, effective, theoretically sound program in the world will have that process occur during treatment. So you're going to be sitting in front of your child, in front of your spouse, your sister, your brother, your mother, your father, and you're going to be listening to them, barely recovering from alcoholism or from depression or anxiety or whatever the issue is. And they're going to tell you how you hurt them, how you let them down. They're going to tell you about their anger. And hopefully you've been prepped for it. And hopefully you've done some of the work, and so that you respond and have the capacity to respond with, I'm so glad you're talking about it. Thanks for telling me. And then the identified patient, they don't need the drugs anymore. They still might be using them, but they don't need them anymore because they get to feel their feelings. Because you've provided them a place where it's safe to be who they are. And you won't agree with them, and they'll have some opinions about you that you will want to contradict. But that's just the defense. You can still have your boundaries. You can accuse me of being crazy. And if I've accepted my crazy, my response is, what's your point? Here's my boundary. And then if we do this work where we work on ourselves and can show up authentically and whole to our children, and they get to be who they are, then their children grow up, and when they're in a toxic relationship, they get out of it. Because when they get gaslighted by their partner and told them that they're being weak or giving up or whatever the accusation is that hooks them, it doesn't hook them anymore because they grew up in a family where it was okay to be a person. And they say to their toxic spouse, that's not our game. I don't play that game. In my family, you didn't have to be right. In my family, you didn't have to be good. You got to be yourself. And so I'm leaving. Not because I'm right or better than you, but because I don't like this. Because I'm not okay with it. And I'm definitely not okay with being told that my feelings are crazy. Because they're just mine. I wrote this. I think that my child, I hear this from parents all the time. I think my child likes to play soccer, but I wonder if she is just doing it to please me, parents will tell me. The emotional and psychological gravitational pull of others is a force we must resist if we are to remain clear about our truth. I'm going to say that again. The emotional and psychological gravitational pull of others is a force we must resist if we are to remain clear about our truth. We don't have to tell our children that they need to play soccer. All we do is smile. And what a child interprets our smile as is, I'm good. This is the right thing to do. And mom and dad aren't going to leave me because they're happy with me. That is the psychology. So your experience was, I was just supporting them in what they love to do in playing soccer. Their experience is, I needed to do it to get mom's approval. So you see, it's a very different experience on one side of the occasion, one side of the equation that it is on the other. So when our children tell us, I just played soccer to make you happy, if we're in a good space, we respond thoughtfully. We develop curiosity. We listen, and we listen to understand. In raising a self, there will be growing pains, but if we establish a pattern of taking others at face value, they'll be required to use their words if they expect to be heard. One of the most common questions I get when I talk about this being a self thing is, what if the other people in my family aren't equipped, haven't been instructed in this philosophy? And it's a slow turn. But eventually, you start to take people at their word, and then they have to use their words. When they tell you, if you tell your spouse, I'm going to go on a guy's vacation or a girl's vacation or whatever it is, are you okay? And they say yes, we take them at face value. And then people learn to tell the truth. Sanford Shapiro, a good friend of mine and a colleague, shared this thought, this phrase with me, and I used it as a chapter heading. He talks about that we move from the fear of being found out to the relief of being seen. Most people I've discovered have a fear that if you really found out who they were, you wouldn't love them. But this work, and if you find a therapist or a partner or a sponsor or somebody who can just see you, there's no greater feeling in the world. And all you want to do is give that same feeling to everybody else. Regardless of euphemisms, I write, circle jumping, getting into somebody else's space, is a lack of intimacy, a lack of healthy connection. It's not loving too much. There's a euphemism that people use in anxious attachment conversations, which is, well, you just love too much. We say this to mothers and fathers all the time. You just love too much. And really, it's not loving too much. It's not enough self. It's not being secure enough. And it's an attempt to violate the sovereignty of others. Some of you might know about the 3 circles. If you've been to our Finding You Intensive, you got a full experiential education in this. But I'm going to go through the 3 circles right now. It's a model for understanding yourself in relationships. If you can imagine 3 circles, imagine me putting 3 hula hoops on the ground, large enough to fit one person standing in them and 2's a crowd. The first circle is your circle, right? Imagine these 3 circles in a line. The first circle is your circle. And in your circle, you have 2 jobs. The first is to know your truth, which is know how you feel, what you want, what you don't want. And the second responsibility is to keep people out of your circle. So what does it look like when somebody tries to get in your circle? They use words like should. You should try mushrooms. You shouldn't be this way. You shouldn't feel the way you feel. Look on the bright side. Think of it this way. Remember, my intentions were good. Somebody told me recently that they were in a therapist's office and they were sharing some of their pain about their childhood. This is an adult. And the therapist said, this is not a place to bash parents. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't think of a better place to bash parents in the world than your therapist's office. Aren't you allowed to think and feel what you feel? This same person shared that they had some abuse from previous therapists. And the therapist also said, understand that every therapist is trying to do their best. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the opposite of therapy. I want to hear how you're mad at your mom, your dad, me. I mean, if we get to that place, that's the best. Tell me how you're disappointed in me. Let me give you an experience where you get to feel whatever you feel, and I am capable of holding it. So we nag, we beg, we plead, we threaten, we intimidate, we should. That's how we get in other people's circle. And that's what it sounds like when someone's trying to get in ours. The second circle, the middle circle of the 3 in a row, is the relationship circle. That's where you express your truth. And you express your truth by saying, here's what I want, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. You make requests, you ask for things, right? In therapy, we do this all the time. We say, you can tell this to your spouse, you can tell this to your child, you can tell this to your mother and to your father. What we don't say is, and they get to say yes or no. But the request isn't crazy. The truth isn't crazy. So your circle, know your truth, keep others out of your circle, stay in your circle. The relationship circle is where you share with the other person how you're feeling or make requests. Then the other circle, the third circle is the other circle, the other person's circle. And they have the exact same 3 responsibilities in their circle. And you have 1 responsibility to their circle, and that is stay out of their circle. So we don't try to talk our children out of substance abuse disorder. We don't try to tell them why they shouldn't be anxious. We don't try to tell them why they should be happy and grateful when they're depressed. We don't do those things. We hear their story, we understand it, and we have boundaries. If you don't go to school, here's the consequence. If you yell at me, here's the consequence. Or I'm going to walk away, or this phone call is over, or this conversation is ending, or you're going to go to evoke therapy programs, or I'm going to move out. Whatever it is. Doesn't have to be those extreme examples, but people always ask me, what if they don't listen to you? And eventually it can get to that point, right? You start to tell the truth. And what you find when you tell the truth and live your truth and know your truth is that the people around you after a while are people that can love you. This is the journey. Finding out who you are and being that person. You know, Plato suggested in a utopian society, there would essentially be one law. And that one law would be to be who you are. I know that sounds like it's missing a lot, but what if people got to feel and be who they are? Excuse me. And we still had boundaries. See, that's the thing, is when I start to talk about containing and listening, and next chapters on finding others, when I start to talk about ways that we can show up for each other, people say, well, what about me? And my response is, that's the assumed part. That's the foundation. And if we've skipped that, let's go back to that. That's why I started with this chapter. And then this idea of finding yourself and being who you are and sorting out your own mental illness, your own issues, your own anxieties, fears, your own mental health struggles, your own darkness. You start to grapple with all of that And guess what? You can be there for other people. That's the magic of this work. It's common to conflate love or loving too much with anxious attachment. I mentioned this earlier. Loving too much is a euphemism for the unhealed attachment wound and its expression in an anxious parent. The problem is not loving too much, but rather not enough self. If you are afraid or anxious or angry or disappointed or frustrated or exasperated with your other, to the extent that you feel those feelings, you have lost contact with them. Because if you knew, if you had the wherewithal to be calm and to see them and could see where they were coming from, everything would make sense. And then you would be required, of course, to act on boundaries that come out of your sense of self. That's the thing. My work is not to tell you what to do, but to help you heal, to help you become who you are. And out of that place, out of those places, those ideas will come your truth, will come your decision. Should I change my career? Should I get married? Should I get divorced? Should I send my child to a program? Should I bring them home? In fact, the word should is probably not even the right word, but do I want to? I used to ask parents all the time. This is really going to be a two-parter, Malia. I'm going to do all the questions in our next broadcast, which I know might be disappointing, but it'll be a good follow-up to this. So next Monday, we'll be doing all the questions that came in. When you learn to be who you are and can show up in a relationship, you are healed, and you provide an experience for the other person that they're okay. So we've got to find people who can tolerate us. We've got to find people who are making their anxiety, their fear, their anger, their project. Because if I need to be a certain way for you not to be afraid or angry, it's not a very safe world for me to live in. And if you send me to a therapist who's going to do the same thing, just using graduate school terms, I've gone from the frying pan to the fire, really. The work is to love yourself first, and that the relationship that you have with others will depend on the quality of the relationship you have with yourself. And that our relationship problems and issues can be traced back to the fractures, to the issues, to the unresolved dilemmas that we have inside of ourselves. And you can only do what you can do. You can't do more. If you try to do more because of a should, you're going to end up resentful and angry. Resentment and angry is often a sign of poor boundaries, of poor self-care, of waiting and hoping and begging and pleading, trying to perform well enough so that somebody will take care of us. But when we learn that we have to take care of us, and we do, and that includes in the relationship with our children, then the people around us learn what's required of them to be around us, right? If you abuse me, I can't stay in this conversation or this discussion or this relationship, maybe. I won't. And even our children, whom, we're not going to abandon, right? But even our children will sense this. When you show up with a self, they can sense it. When you show up anxious and afraid, they can sense that. They might not be able to put words to it, but they can sense that it's their job to take care of you. And it is a crushing burden for them to take care of you. All right, I'm going to wrap up this evening, and I'll do the questions and answers in our next broadcast because I've already gone over time. If you want to do a deep dive, our intensives are online or in person. The next one is November 13th. The next one that has available is actually later this week. So if you're interested in doing a deep dive, you can do it from the comfort of your own home with a computer, November 13th through 15th. The in-person one in November is full. We have COVID precautions. We have testing. We've been doing it all along. So even though the COVID spike is significant, we have safety protocols for everybody, including the staff are tested. So check with us, contact Sarah, contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. If you want to do an adventure trip with your child, or your young adult child wants to do an adventure trip, or you yourself are an adult who wants to do an adventure trip, anywhere from 3 to 30-day programming with our therapeutic staff. We have parent support groups for both our wilderness parents and for our intensives parents. So check our website or email Malia at evoketherapy.com. The next one for wilderness parents is November 12th at 6:30 p.m. And the next one for alumni is November 10th. That's tomorrow. We ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups. All of these broadcasts are available. Excuse me. All of these podcasts are available on your Finding You app, Finding You podcast. So you can listen to them there. You can find us on social media. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, which I'm teaching in a series, are available on Amazon.com. And our next broadcast will be a week from today. A week from today. So I'll be doing the question and answer for all the ones that are left over. So I'll just ask Malia to copy all of those and save those, and I'll be going through questions and answers on Monday. I'm going to be doing every other week. I'm going to be doing a chapter and then questions and answer, chapter and then question and answer. So that's how this is going to go. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it's a nice point of contact. I'll find out after I look at your questions if I've brought up more questions that I've answered, and I look forward to addressing those when I talk to you next time. Take care, folks. Have a great week, and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.